Rich family mocked the old black woman cleaning their hotel lobby until the CEO walked in and called her mother. What happens next will leave you speechless. Nobody paid attention to the old woman on her knees. That was the thing about invisibility. It wasn't just about being unseen. It was about being present in a room full of people and still not existing to any of them. It was about scrubbing the same marble floors that millionaires walked across without breaking stride, without blinking, without once looking down. Evelyn Carter had learned that lesson slowly, painfully, over the course of 30 years. She had learned to become a ghost. And on the morning of August 14th, 2021, she was so practiced at it that even she had started to forget she was still alive. Before we continue, tell us in the comments what time it is and where you are watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Now let's get back to our story. She arrived at the Grand Regent Hotel at 5:45 in the morning, the way she always did, before the guests stirred, before the chandeliers were switched on and the lobby transformed into the glittering palace the brochures promised. She arrived in the gray hush of early Chicago, her coat too thin for August because it was the only coat she owned, her sneakers, a pair of worn-out white Nikes so old the soles had begun to separate at the toe, squeaking softly against the wet pavement outside. She did not take the front entrance. She never did. She went around back, through the service corridor, the one that smelled of old grease and industrial cleaner. She punched her card at 6:02. She collected her mop and her cart. She went to work. Evelyn was 68 years old. Her hands trembled now, a slight, persistent tremor that had begun 3 years earlier after the stroke. The doctors had called it minor. Evelyn had called it terrifying, because trembling hands were not minor when your hands were all you had left. They were not minor when your entire survival depended on holding a mop steady enough that no supervisor noticed, on wringing out a cloth without dropping it, on folding linens with the precision of a woman half your age. She had trained herself to compensate. She worked slower on bad mornings. She gripped harder. She breathed through the frustration and the fear and the quiet humiliation of a body that was slowly, stubbornly betraying her. She had been in this country 62 years. She had cleaned offices, schools, restaurants, hospital wards. She had raised a son alone in a 2-room apartment on the South Side. She had done everything right, or tried to. And still, somehow, life had managed to whittle her down to this, to a woman on her knees before sunrise, polishing floors that would be scuffed again by noon. She did not complain. Complaining was a luxury she had never been able to afford. By 9 o'clock, the lobby was alive. The Grand Regent on a Saturday morning was a theater of wealth, luggage carts gliding across marble, voices projecting the easy confidence of people who had never once worried about next month's rent. Evelyn moved along the edges, her cart a kind of shield, her uniform gray and slightly faded, the hotel logo above the left breast pocket, marking her as part of the furniture. She had learned not to make eye contact. It was safer that way, less complicated. She was working near the east side of the lobby, near the grand staircase, when she heard them. There were 4 of them, a family. She understood immediately, though family was perhaps too warm a word for the dynamic she observed. The man was large and red-faced, the kind of wealthy that announces itself through the cut of the suit. Beside him stood a woman who could only be described as deliberately beautiful, hair lacquered, jewelry visible from 20 feet, a posture engineered to communicate superiority. Vanessa Whitmore. Evelyn had seen her before twice, in passing. She was the kind of woman who made hotel staff instinctively straighten. Evelyn kept her eyes down, kept moving. "Excuse me." The voice was pointed, the kind of voice designed to cut. Evelyn looked up. Vanessa Whitmore was staring at her from 8 feet away, and she was not staring the way a person stares at another person. She was staring the way a person stares at something they have found on the bottom of their shoe. "You missed a spot." She gestured vaguely with one hand toward a section of floor Evelyn had already cleaned twice. "Right there. Are you blind or just careless?" The lobby did not go quiet. That was the cruelest part. No one turned. No one intervened. The conversations continued, the luggage carts rolled, the chandeliers glittered. because this was the kind of thing that happened to women like Evelyn in rooms like this, and everyone in that lobby had decided, wordlessly, collectively, that it was not their business. Evelyn turned back to the spot, began to clean it again. I mean, really. Vanessa's voice was climbing now, performing. She turned slightly toward her companions, making them audience. Look at her. They're letting just anyone work here now? What is she, 100? She can barely hold them up. Someone laughed. Not loud, just enough. Evelyn's hands tightened on the handle. The tremor worsened for a moment. She felt it, that betrayal, that involuntary shaking that always seemed to arrive precisely when she most needed stillness. She breathed. She breathed the way she had taught herself to breathe in 30 years of rooms like this, slowly, deeply, without letting anything show on her face. I want her removed. Vanessa said it simply, to no one in particular and to everyone at once. I want her out of this lobby. I don't pay what I pay to watch some shaking old woman make a mess of the floors. Get management. Now. Evelyn did not move, not because she was defiant, but because she had nowhere to go. This was her job. This lobby was her shift. If she walked away from the only income she had, from a $47 an hour that stood between her and the street. She had been close to the street before. She had stood at that exact edge, looked over it, felt the wind from that drop. She was not going back. So she stayed. She cleaned. And she breathed. It was in that moment, in the silence of her endurance, in the visible tremble of her hands and the rigid dignity of her posture, that she became, without knowing it, extraordinary. She was still cleaning when the lobby doors opened again. She did not look up immediately. She heard the shift in the room, a slight change in the acoustic quality, the way attention redirects itself when someone significant enters. She kept her eyes on the floor. She was nearly finished. Mother. The word arrived like a stone dropped into still water. Quiet. Then the rings spreading out. Then the whole surface of the room transformed. Evelyn went still. She turned. The young man standing 20 feet from her was tall, dark-suited, 30-something, with the kind of face that photographs well and holds grief even better. He was staring at her with an expression she had not seen directed at her in decades, the raw, disoriented recognition of someone confronting something they had believed was lost forever. Mother, Daniel Whitmore said again, and this time his voice broke on the second syllable. The lobby went quiet then. Actually quiet. Evelyn's mop hit the floor. She looked at him, really looked, the way she hadn't allowed herself to look at anyone in years. She looked past the suit, past the title, past the 34-year-old face, and found it. The shape of his jaw. The particular way his eyes sat in his face. The small scar above his left eyebrow, faint now, almost invisible, but she knew exactly how it had gotten there. She knew, because she had been holding him when it happened. She had been pulling him through smoke and heat and collapsing wood in a South Side apartment building on a Tuesday night in October 1992, and she had pressed him against her chest and covered his head with her hands and run, and the beam that caught her, the one that drove her to her knees, had grazed him as she fell. She had survived. She had told herself, in the wreckage of her recovery, that he had been taken in, that the social workers had found him a home, that her disappearance into poverty and illness had not destroyed him, that he was somewhere safe and whole and alive. She had never let herself look for him, because looking meant risking the discovery that she had been wrong, that he wasn't okay, that what she'd done, letting go, stepping back, vanishing into the margins of the world rather than dragging him down into them, had somehow caused more damage than the fire itself. She had been wrong about almost all of it, but not about his survival. He was here. He was alive. He was running toward her. The reunion that followed was not elegant. It was not cinematic. It was a 68-year-old woman and a 34-year-old man in the middle of a hotel lobby, both of them shaking, her from a familiar tremor, him from something older and more desperate, holding on to each other the way people hold on when they have been circling a grief for so long that finally releasing it feels like the ground giving way beneath them. It was Vanessa Whitmore who broke the silence, though not in the way she intended. What is going on? Her voice was flat with something that was trying to be authority and was landing closer to panic. "Daniel, what?" "She's my mother." His voice was steady now. The grief had settled into something firmer. He did not let go of Evelyn's hands. "She's been working in your hotel. In our hotel." He turned to look at his father's wife, and the look was not cruel, but it was exact. "For how long?" The answer, when it came from a quietly horrified floor manager, was 14 months. The story that unraveled in the hours and days that followed was not simple. Stories of this kind never are. There were lawyers involved and conversations that happened behind closed doors and explanations that satisfied some people and horrified others. There were questions about how the HR records had been managed, about who had known what and when, about whether the coincidence of Evelyn's hiring could possibly have been as innocent as it appeared. There were questions Evelyn herself could not fully answer because she had not known, when she applied for the job, who owned the hotel. She had known only that it paid, that the hours were predictable, that they needed someone who could start immediately and work without complaint. She had been good at those things her whole life. What changed in the aftermath was almost too large to catalog in practical terms. Daniel Whitmore did not simply give his mother a room and a check. He spent 3 months restructuring the terms of her existence from the ground up: health care, housing, the legal and financial security that should have surrounded her decades ago and had instead been swallowed up by illness and circumstance and particular cruelty of a world that grinds certain people down with great efficiency and zero apology. But the moment Evelyn remembered longest was not the reunion in the lobby. It was the morning before. It was a Tuesday in August before her shift when she had passed a man sleeping in a doorway 2 blocks from a hotel service entrance. He was young, younger than she expected, maybe 40, wearing no shoes, his feet cracked and bleeding from walking on summer pavement. She had looked at him for a long moment. Then she had sat down on the step beside him and taken off her sneakers. They were the only pair she owned. The soles were separating. They were not good shoes, but they were better than nothing, and nothing was what he had. She had set them beside him, slipped her bare feet back into the rubber slippers she carried in her bag for the locker room, and walked the rest of the way to work. She had not thought of it as a sacrifice. She had thought of it as the only reasonable thing a person could do. A man had been watching from across the street. He was a journalist, as it turned out, working on an unrelated story, killing time before a meeting in the neighborhood. He had taken a photograph, not to exploit, but because he was a person who recognized Grace when he saw it, and Grace in a worn-out uniform before 6 in the morning struck him as the kind of thing that deserved to be witnessed. The photograph sat in his phone for 3 weeks. Then the story broke: the lobby, the reunion, the woman on her knees, and he understood what he was holding. He published it without her name. Just the image, the gray uniform, the bare feet in rubber slippers, the worn-out sneakers sitting beside a sleeping man's hands. The caption read, "She had nothing. She gave it anyway." It was shared 11 million times in 4 days. Evelyn Carter, when she was told about it, was quiet for a long moment. Then she said she didn't understand what all the fuss was about. She said her mother had done the same thing for a woman on their street when she was 7 years old, and nobody had written a single word about it. That, in the end, was the most important thing anyone said about any of it. Because the point was never the photograph. The point was the 30 years before the photograph. The point was the mop and the marble and the trembling hands and the way she had held her head up in rooms designed to make her feel small. The point was the sneakers on a stranger's step, offered freely, without calculation, without an audience, without any expectation that anyone was watching. The point was that she had done it anyway. She had always done it anyway. That was the thing about Evelyn Carter that no camera could fully capture and no caption could completely contain. She had never stopped being someone worth watching. The world had just taken 30 years to look. Drop a comment below. What time is it where you are, and what made you click on this story? We'd love to know. See you in the next story.